Number 10. Shot by a diamond bullet. This is actually a pretty smart way to deal with Emma Frost, but all in all a pretty dumb way for her to die when you kind of read it on paper. Both like makes sense and doesn't make sense. I mean, Emma Frost has a diamond form, which makes her pretty much indestructible, for the most part anyways. So how does one defeat her when she's in her diamond form? Apparently by exposing the flaw in her diamond form and using the same material to kill her. How do you shatter a diamond? With another diamond, apparently. I don't know if that would actually work, but comic book science. Emma's diamond form is her secondary mutation, and while we've seen many attacks on her defended by this form of hers, apparently a diamond bullet can just insta-shatter her. I mean, I've heard of diamonds cutting diamonds, but never necessarily being used to completely shatter a diamond. If shot at her exact weak point though, apparently this is just what a diamond bullet can do, which is something one of the Cuckoos, Esme, knew about and exposed to kill Emma, mind-controlling mutant Angel Salvador to carry out the execution. Don't worry though, Jean, while merged with the Phoenix, managed to bring her back with Beast's help. Jean can do anything.
Number 9. Taken out by the Punisher. Some of the most creative forms of transportation to the afterlife come at the hands of Frank Castle, the Punisher. But at the end of the day, Frank is just one seriously messed up guy. A normal guy with a good chunk of training, a hell of an arsenal, and a little bit of creativity. He is not a match for a lot of the incredibly powerful beings out in Marvel Comics, but somehow we have the Punisher kills the Marvel Universe story. When his family were taken out by being bystanders of a superhero conflict, Frank is given the backing to take out all those who call themselves superheroes, and my god, a lot of these deaths make no sense, because of course they don't. He takes out the Hulk by waiting until he is Bruce Banner again, but that's never how the Hulk has worked in Marvel Comics. He took down Dr. Doom, with his only excuse for winning being that Doom stopped to give a speech, which does kind of make sense, but the worst example comes when he takes on the mutants. By the sheer will of lazy writing and Frank's throwaway explanation of manipulation, all the combined X teams are having their final battle against Magneto, Apocalypse, and their unholy alliance of acolytes and evil mutants on the moon in an air-sealed dome, which is where Frank drops a nuke on them, taking them all out. Ignore the fact that a good chunk of those here would be able to survive that kind of attack, and we're all good.
Number 8. EMP versus Phoenix Force. This has to be one of the most ridiculous ones. The Phoenix is typically known as being an unstoppable, undefeatable entity. I mean, the first time around, the only way that it was able to be defeated was basically by self-sacrifice. However, that hasn't stopped people from somehow banishing it or straight up killing the entity. Case in point, when Magneto defeated Jean Grey as the Phoenix by administering a powerful electromagnetic pulse, which gave her a planetary-sized stroke. Literally, those are the direct words from the comic. That is some major comic stuff right there. Only in comics would that happen.
Number 7. Being a part of X-Statix. Lots of deaths in X-Statix were stupid, but that was the point. The whole thing was a bit of a satire on reality TV. The team itself isn't exactly one of the premier mutant teams out in the world, and that's putting it lightly. The members of the team aren't exactly the most impressive. The original team made up of mutants Zeitgeist, who has the power of Super Puke, La Nuit, who has Dark Force powers, Battering Ram, who was a big purple goat-looking man, Plasm, who had liquidy water powers, Gin Genie, who could create earthquakes depending on how much she drank, and Sluck, who is basically a squid. They went by X-Force, which as you may know shares its name with a much more impressive team. But all those original members, minus 3 of them who I didn't mention, and Sluck, who was blown up by a tank in South Africa, all got completely decimated in spectacularly embarrassing fashion during a rescue mission to save a pop music boy band named Boys R Us. Turns out their demise was actually planned by the team's manager, coach, and its leader, Zeitgeist himself, because they thought a team with a constantly changing roster and high body count would gain them fan interest. The team managed to go on with pretty horrible results. There have been 28 members of X-Statix who have passed away over their history, with only 9 of them surviving. So yeah, don't ever join this team.
Number 6. Eaten by birds. Miss Arrow has a pretty wild death in the comics. For those of you who are unfamiliar or haven't heard of her, that is probably because you know her by a different name, the Other. That is right, Miss Arrow is actually the extremely powerful spider totem entity that is linked to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. As such, she is entirely made up of spiders, despite sometimes appearing to be human while under the guise of Miss Arrow. Because of this, she was at one time killed by a bunch of birds who devoured the spiders that made her up, with Peter squishing the final spider that survived the bird attack. This wouldn't be the end of the Other though, as one more day messed up the whole continuity thanks to reality being warped, with Peter having actually never accepted the Other in this alternate, which is now the main, reality.
Number 5. Being dumb. Magneto in the Ultimate Universe was like the bad guy. He was nuts, and he had the power to back it up, which he proved when he used his abilities to offset the magnetic poles, which put the whole world into chaos. Tidal waves in New York, mega flash freezes in Latveria, volcanoes erupting in the Amazon, all that good stuff. Naturally, the survivors were not happy, and they would be coming after Magneto with a vengeance. They aren't dumb, so of course their attack on the villain would be planned out. Right? Well, it doesn't seem like it was. While all the surviving heroes make their assault on Magneto's fortress, the hot-headed Warren Worthington, you know, the guy whose only power is that he has wings, decides that he is going to jump the gun and come full speed blasting through a window, giving Magneto a good old punch to the face. Magneto could have squashed this guy like a bug in one swift move, but he doesn't even think Angel is worth the effort. Instead, he lets Sabretooth, his mad dog, do the deed. Sabretooth pounces on him, rips one of Warren's wings off with his mouth, and then stomps on the mutant's neck, taking him off the board in one page. Idiot.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you love hearing about weird, dumb deaths, well, we have a lot of weird things for you on our weirdest playlist, so go check that out. It's full of weirdness. Number 4, waking up Fin Fang Foom. Something you shouldn't ever do? Wake up a sleeping dragon. As Jerry Carpenter learned in Hulk vs. Fin Fang Foom, issue number 1, which admittedly is a pretty wild and weird story, so if you're into that, you should go check it out. Here, as promised, the two beings end up fighting. But first, we're treated to a story clearly inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing. Probably also why this guy's named Jerry Carpenter. You see what's happening here? Except Fin Fang Foom is the shapeshifter in this tale. For those who don't know, Fin Fang Foom is actually an alien whose race is actually known for their shapeshifting abilities. I feel like not a lot of people think about that, but that is a thing. Needless to say, Jerry finds Foom below the ice and sends for the rest of his team up in the Arctic. They're basically like a research team, but instead of just waiting, he is hasty to proceed because he basically wants to name this newfound finding of what he believes is an undiscovered type of dinosaur after himself. He smashes through the ice with a pick, only to awaken Foom. Foom blasts forth and takes Carpenter for his host, basically wearing him like a skin suit. The really weird thing though is I think this is the only case of Foom like actually needing to do this. He claims he's attempting to rebuild his strength by merging with hosts and is like looking for a real strong host when he runs into the Hulk, but I don't think he's ever actually needed to do that before or after this point ever again. And he can just shapeshift on his own. He doesn't actually need a human host to turn into a human, so there's a lot of weird stuff happening in this comic. But hey, if you gotta make Hulk and Foom fight, I guess you gotta do some weird stuff.
Number 3, falling on Rogue. Nothing stands up to falling on a woman who leeches life away, unable to pick herself up. Well, falling isn't the right word. It was more like Mr. Sinister was held down. Following the events of M-Day, a mutant named Hope Summers is born, bringing hope to the mutant species. Well, Mr. Sinister, he reassembled the Marauders and planned to control the future of mutant kind by stealing Hope. Sinister knew this and wanted to use Hope to control the mutant population because the mutants can't just have something without a villain trying to mess it all up. Sinister regrouped his Marauders alongside Mystique, who knew that Hope was necessary to save her daughter, Rogue, from her out-of-control powers. Well, Sinister failed to capture Hope, and like an idiot, he informs Mystique that he is unable to help her save Rogue. Safe to say that Mystique doesn't appreciate that very much. She grabs and shoves Sinister's face onto the unconscious Rogue, and unable to get up, his life is sucked away. Now I'll admit, it's a little bit awesome, but in the massive gallery of villains losing their life, it's arguably one of the lamest ones. Imagine Sinister having to tell people about this one when he eventually returns. Embarrassing.
Number 2, turned into a sundae. I don't actually know if Ice Cream died here, but it certainly seems to be implied that he did. At least to me it does. This is the canon that lives in my mind. Ice Cream was a character who could turn into ice cream, hence his name. Ice Cream, get it? He infiltrated the X-Mansion in the first and only issue of Obnoxio the Clown. Speaking of weird comics, that's another one. He wanted revenge on the X-Men because they had cooler mutant powers than he did. Although how he really planned to get said revenge and beat them when his powers only allowed him to turn into ice cream, I'm not really sure. He attempted to turn the danger room on the students, but this plan ended up failing, with Professor X lowering the temperature of the control room to below freezing, which caused Ice Cream to freeze solid. At the end of the story, Obnoxio the Clown decorates Ice Cream as a giant sundae, while Ice Cream's fate is left ultimately undetermined. We never see him again, and it's possible that he literally could have met his end by being mistaken and consumed as actual ice cream at some point later in his life, so yeah.
Number 1, just take take off the quiver. A lot of the time, when a hero's light goes out, it will be in an ultimate display of self-sacrifice, throwing themselves into impossible circumstances in order to save the majority. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, that kind of thing. It's the #1 heroic move, but it only really works when there is absolutely no other option. When looking at Hawkeye's sacrifice in Avengers Disassembled, there were a whole handful of other options, and most of them were pretty obvious, making for a heroic self-sacrifice that just ended up coming across as incredibly dumb and unnecessary. Basically, Wanda Maximoff has gone completely bonkers and turned on the Avengers, but none of them know that just yet. She's already caused the passing of both Vision and Scott Lang, Ant-Man, and all the Avengers have assembled in order to figure out what the heck was happening. Using her Hex powers, she created a Kree warship to show up out of nowhere and go on the attack. Hawkeye runs off to go get some more arrows, and when he comes back, he goes off, taking out Kree left, right, and center until he is hit in his explosive arrow quiver by an energy weapon. With his quiver on fire and set to explode, instead of just taking it off or firing off the arrows, Hawkeye grabs a Kree with a jetpack and blasts off into the warship, blowing both it and himself clean off the battlefield. Starting off at number 10 is Glenn. Kicking off this list today with one that hits close to home for most people. In both the TV show and the comic books, the former pizza delivery boy turned zombie fighter and scout, Glenn, was the one person in the group that believed there could be a future for them all, and he was easily one of people's most favorite characters, which unfortunately in this world means that he probably won't be around for too long. The worst part is that you have so much faith in this character and his future in the story. Maggie was pregnant with his child, and they were going to start a family as they wanted to rebuild society. Fortunately, the group leader Rick Grimes and his friends crossed a guy by the name of Negan, who led a group called, ironically, the Saviors. The group unwittingly incurred his wrath by taking out a lot of the Saviors that attacked the group. Since Rick had taken the lives of Negan's men, Negan came back in full force to get his revenge. But lining up the group of survivors, Negan made his choice at random. It was one of the most tense moments in the comic, and when he finally chose Glenn, bashing his head in with Lucille in front of his wife and friends, he not only proved that anyone in this world could die, but he proved that a comic book can make me cry and want to throw up all at the same time. Number 9, Nemesis. Now look, I'm not gonna say that Nemesis is a great comic book. It's disliked by a lot of people because it basically just relies on its shock and brutality factor, but gives a main character that isn't really likable at all and has a pretty lame plot. But it does rely on the brutality, which means yes, there are some horrible ways to pass into the afterlife presented here. Now disclaimer, the original was not published by Image Comics, so I won't be talking about that one. Instead, we will focus on Nemesis Reloaded, which was published by Image Comics. Anyways, in issue 3 of the Image comic, Nemesis tricks his way onto a police boat with a very specific officer on board. This officer was responsible for the arrest of Nemesis' parents. While they probably did deserve to be arrested because they were criminals, they also lost their lives, and for that, Nemesis wants revenge. So, after knocking out the officer, he comes back to find the boat is now sinking. Nemesis explains who he is and why this is happening, and then he waits as the boat sinks, and then is picked up by his henchmen. All the while, the officer sinks to his watery grave. No thank you. I'm good. I don't like that. Number 8, Headbutt. The oldest Viltrumites are usually the most powerful of the bunch. One old-timer Viltrumite goes by the name of Conquest, and he is one grizzled old man, battle-scarred with a cybernetic arm and breath that smells like feet. He arrives on Earth to check on Mark's progress with taking over the planet after the Invincible War, so it's safe to say Mark is not in the best mood. But Conquest does not care, and these two have an absolute slog of a battle over the course of 4 issues of the comic. Conquest takes a few hits, but Mark is no match for this guy in the slightest. In an attempt to help Invincible, his girl, Adam Eve, decides to show up on the battlefield and lend a hand. She was far out of her league, and Conquest punched a hole right through her. Actually, he didn't punch, he went like that. I don't know what to call that. That was a line for Mark though, and it sends him into a frenzy. The two Superman-like beings fly straight at one another, and Mark punches straight through Conquest's cybernetic arm, breaking his own arm in the process. He uses his unbroken hand to clock the old man across the face. He bites a massive chunk out of the guy's shoulder. Adam Eve, out of nowhere, revives herself and lends a helpful blast, and then when Conquest breaks Mark's other hand, Invincible uses his head and headbutts Conquest over and over over and over and over and over again until what was once an old grizzled Viltrumite's face is now just ground beef. Number 7. Completely obliterated. If you haven't heard of Image Comics' new series Vanish, allow me to introduce you. Vanish? Nerds. Now you've met. Vanish follows Oliver Harrison. This chosen one peaked at the age of 14 when he took down the leader of the biggest threat to his universe in a mystical place called the Everkeep. Now, as an adult, this chosen one indulges in every vice he can, living a mediocre, sloppy life. Until a group of heroes show up called the Prestige, who are actually the followers of the threat that Oliver took down as a child. The leader of this group of heroes is called Halcyon, and just like the rest, he isn't what he actually seems. Trying to get to Oliver, Halcyon goes after Oliver's ex-best friend, another magic user by the name of Deacon Dust. But Deacon is loyal and refuses to give in to Halcyon no matter how much pain the hero inflicts on him. After launching a bloody ball of spit in Halcyon's face, Deacon is subsequently obliterated in an explosion of guts, innards, and 2 eyeballs. This is only issue 4, so I for one hope we get to see Deacon again, but after that, I don't think there's much chance. Number 6. Bit by a walker. In the world of Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead, other people are the most dangerous foe one can encounter. People with selfish motivations and with no kind of law and order to keep them in check will do the absolute worst things, but the whole reason that is the case in this story is because the rest of the world have been turned into a horde of undead. So many characters fall to the undead in these comics, and not a single one of those untimely demises looks like they'd be particularly great. For starters, you're having chunks ripped out of you by a walking corpse. That is terrifying. But in most cases, the walkers don't travel solo, which means that more often than not, you're being completely swarmed and torn apart by an entire herd of the Walking Dead. So that's all bad enough, but what if you get bit but manage to escape? Well, now you have to slowly and agonizingly succumb to the zombie infection, turning you into one of the undead and potentially forcing you to turn on your own friends. That's assuming you or one of your closest friends isn't around to put you out of your misery. There is a reason The Walking Dead caused the collapse of society in this Image Comics series. It's because they're scary. Number 5. Thrag vs. Battle Beast. The incredibly powerful and barbarian-like alien known as Thok, aka Battle Beast, fights for the good guys or the bad guys, as long as it serves his goal to find his equal and better in combat so that they can bring the end of his life in an honorable battle. Honor is the key part here. During his fight against Thrag, the unfathomably strong leader of the Viltrumites, Thok recognizes Thrag's strength and the two go at it. Now, the Coalition of Worlds organized the use of Ragnars, which are one of the only species of aliens who have proven strong enough to take down Viltrumites. Battle Beast was told that they would only be released if he failed to take down Thrag, so when they were released at the start of the battle and gave Thrag a massive wound, Battle Beast was actually incredibly peed, and he decided to stop fighting Thrag and instead help him defeat the Ragnars so that they could have a fair fight, which Thrag even remarks was a stupid thing to do. But not only did he take away his own advantage, but he even injured himself across the abdomen in the same way that Thrag had been injured, just so he wouldn't have any unfair advantages. These two absolute monsters fought for days until Thrag got the upper hand and crushed the heart of Thok after the honorable warrior thanked Thrag for the fight of his life. Literally. Number 4. Duel on the Sun. But since I hate Thrag for taking the life of Battle Beast and for being a Freddie Mercury clone, let's talk about how his life came to a close. In the climactic battle between Mark Grayson, Invincible, and Thrag, who had been one of the primary antagonists through the series, Invincible had taken their fight to the very surface of the sun itself. These guys are so powerful that their fight actually goes on for some time, but once Mark forces the two of them into the sun, things really start to heat up. Pun intended. These two keep up their fight even as they're both burning and melting, breaking bones and taking chunks out of each other. The problem for Thrag is that Mark has allies. Thrag has no one. His only motivation is strength, and in the end, that strength failed him when Mark got help from one of Robot's suits that gave him just a few extra minutes of survival on the sun's surface. The slogfest finally came to an end when Mark took a bite out of Thrag's neck, leaving him to burn to nothingness on the sun while Mark was saved by Alan the alien. Number 3. Head Smushed. Saga is an awesome comic book out of Image Comics, and I just started reading it last week, and it's quickly quickly becoming a favorite. In the comic, there are bounty hunters, mercenary types called freelancers. One of these freelancers goes by the name The Will, and he is hired to bring down the main characters for supposed crimes that they committed. The crime of being in love and making a baby together. But that's not important. The Will takes a trip to a lovely little place called Sextillion. If you didn't infer from the name of this place, it's essentially a whole colony in space that seems to have one purpose: pleasure. Oh, fair warning, this comic is not for kids. I should probably say that. Speaking of that though, the Will gets picked up by a groomer. Basically a guy who is in charge of a handful of women and the one who kind of runs the organization. Well, he introduces the Will to one of the girls that he thinks the Will be interested in. For some very obvious reasons, the Will is not interested in this girl and is actually incredibly angry that this girl is even being used like this. So, the Will introduces this groomer's head to the insides of his hands and completely destroys it. Gone in a flash. Good riddance, bye. Number 2, Crucified. I bet you were worried Spawn wasn't gonna make this list, didn't you? I wouldn't do that to you guys, come on. In Spawn number 27, we learn of Philip Cran, who has spent his life studying the occult so that one day he could gain access to heaven. Pretty sure that's not how it works, but hey. Calling himself the Curse, very cool, Philip decided the best thing to do in his heavenly endeavor would be to bring down the Hellspawn Al Simmons. Spawn was an agent of heaven at that point though, and was imbued with mystical energy, which Philip would then siphon off for himself. Because he is clearly no match for Spawn, Philip goes with a complete sneak attack on Simmons, blowing a hole clear through Spawn's chest. Unsurprisingly, Spawn wasn't especially pleased about being ambushed and made holy by this psycho. See what I did there? It was good. So he tracks down the Curse and blasts off his bionic arm. The two engage in a battle that began and ended pretty quickly though. Since Spawn was at full power and the Curse was just a crazy guy in a costume, he didn't last that long at all. Spawn beat the absolute beans out of the Curse and then strung up his almost lifeless body against a wall in an alley to warn off any further enemies. That would have resulted in Philip's passing, but his fate was actually even worse later on. But we're not going to talk about it. Number 1, Paul. Now that was pretty bad, but let's fast forward all the way to Spawn issue number 322. Essentially, there was this vampire named Paul, and he had taken a girl and had been keeping her in his house for years, where he would not only drain her, but do anything he wanted. Now look, Spawn is from hell, but there are some lines you just don't cross. Spawn's anger and rage at this guy seems to make him even more powerful, to the point that none of Paul's attempts to stop the Hellspawn even faze him a little bit, and he quickly incapacitates the vampire using a horrifying amount of bugs, but not before he tells Paul to say Monday. When Paul comes back to, he is chained up and Spawn makes him say Friday. Kinda weird, but that's because it has been 5 days since the vampire last fed. On top of that, Spawn had made some roaches go inside Paul and eat away at anything his body produced to help with his hunger, so this guy is starving. Spawn lets a mouse go free down a skinny little hallway and informs Paul that there is even more blood for him at the end of the hallway, and he can either go down that or stay where he is and be consumed by the roaches. Naturally, Paul chooses the hallway, but you see, Spawn had removed all the spikes from his costume and instead put them on either side of said hallway, so Paul has to basically be torn to pieces as he makes his way through, with the bugs chasing after every drop of Paul's blood that hits the ground. But he does it, and when he finally gets through, Spawn is there with Paul's mistreated dogs, who have also not eaten in 5 days. Spawn gives Paul the key to the exit, which is back on the other end of the hallway, so Paul is forced to go back through, pursued by ravenous dogs on one side and blood and flesh consuming insects on the other. Needless to say, Paul doesn't make it through. Alright, kicking off the list at number 10 is Robin. Why not kick off this list at the beginning? The inciting incident for our protagonist. In both the show and the comic book, we pick up with Huey Campbell, who isn't exactly the pillar of his community, when he is out and about with his girlfriend, Robin. In the show, Huey and Robin are walking along the street when Robin accidentally winds up on the street and gives Huey a kiss. In the comic, Huey and Robin are at a fair when they share their kiss and are all lovey and giddy and all that good romantic stuff. But in both instances, the happy moment is brought to an incredibly abrupt end when Robin is completely obliterated thanks to the superhero known as A-Train. For the show, A-Train himself runs straight through Robin, causing both him and Huey to be completely covered in Robin soup. In the comic, A-Train and a supervillain were doing some super speed battle when the villain was rammed straight into Robin open and then a brick wall, moving at about Mach 3. In both instances, Huey is left hanging onto Robin's detached forearms. At least it was quick.
Number 9. Disfigured and discarded. I think one of the worst ways to go in the comics is actually Vicor's implied death. Although we don't see it on panel, the soup known as Mighty Warrior is used by Butcher to gain information on the Scorchers. How does Butcher convince Vicor to join him? By visiting him at his wife Norska's funeral and throwing him into the cremation oven next to her remains. While left horribly disfigured by this incident right afterwards, Vicor surprisingly survives thanks to his superhuman durability and even manages to heal most of his face. In the end, once Butcher has no more use of him, it's implied that he basically takes Mighty Warrior out to the forest in the guise of a secret meeting to dispose of him. Brutal. I just can't believe that Butcher did this at, Mighty Warrior's wife's funeral. Like, I know Vicor wasn't too broken up about it because of what happens in that comic, or at least, he seemed to move on pretty quickly, but still. Then again, this is Butcher, so I guess I shouldn't be too surprised.
Number 8. Head Pop. In The Boys TV show, there is a character named Victoria Nadia Newman, who becomes a pretty major antagonist, whereas the character she is based on, Victor Newman, in the comics, is just the guy who becomes vice president. The thing about Victoria, unlike Victor, is she is actually, spoiler alert, a soup, with the inflexible ability to make people's heads completely pop in a small explosion of disgustingness. Using this ability, she has been able to take out Susan Rayner, Jonah Vogelbaum, Alastair Adana, and several other members of Congress. Now, just like Robin, at least this is quick, but it's not exactly a demise I would wish on anyone. I can't imagine the pain of having your head explode would be light. And because it's so quick, the rest of your body would have to catch up to what just happened, and the idea of that is not sitting well with me in my tummy.
Number 7. Sneeze. Many of these for me are going to be from the Boys live action series because they're just so brutal and so visual, and I just love the live action series so much. Once you see a lot of these, it's hard to get them out of your head. Case in point, in season 3 of the show, when Peter, Termite's love interest, is killed. Termite shrinks down to do something that I probably can't talk about here on YouTube. Let's just say it's something Peter very much enjoys. However, during this intimate moment between them, while Termite is shrunk down and literally inside of Peter's body, Termite sneezes. This causes Termite to unintentionally lose control of his powers momentarily, which can happen when he sneezes, changing back to his normal size. Well, I think you can see where I'm going with this one. If you have also watched season 3, which I hope you have if you're watching this video, then I'm sure this was also a moment that forever stuck out in your mind.
Number 6. Pop Claw. This part is kind of twofold. A-Train in the show seems like one of the only redeemable members of the Seven, outside of Starlight obviously. Well, A-Train was once on a team called Teenage Kicks, with Pop Claw, a Wolverine-inspired soup, and his secret girlfriend. Pop Claw was involved in one of the show's most heinous deaths when she accidentally crushes her landlord with her legs while they were doing the deed, if you know what I mean. That one was pretty shocking to watch, but Popclaw herself also suffered a pretty upsetting passing. Popclaw has a pretty damaged reputation. A-Train was so insecure about this, especially in the eyes of Homelander, that when he saw her as a liability, he took her life by giving her a substance overdose. It was pretty horrible to watch and makes me wonder how the hell they are planning to redeem A-Train going forward. Also, it's very real.
Number 5. Biting your own tongue. Sounds like a weird way to put it, but that is in essence what happened to Stormfront in the end. Or at least what we were told happened to her. I'm pretty sure it's what happened, but she took her own life by biting off her tongue. While I'm still a little skeptical of this, as we don't see her body or the act in question, I do believe that Stormfront at this point was extremely depressed, and so it does make sense that she would, take this out. And also, we do at least, see where she was when it happened. She ends up dying on Homelander's birthday, which causes him to have a straight up diabolical reaction to a woman threatening to jump off the building, who throughout the course of their conversation basically changes her mind. He's supposed to save her because it's his birthday save. I personally think, although Stormfront seemed to deserve her death and that it definitely felt karmic to me, that this would still be a pretty terrible way to go.
Number 4. Timothy. The Deep in the show is pretty much the most pathetic hero of the Seven. He might not be as pure evil and maniacal as Homelander, but he's still done some incredibly horrible things that are not redeemable at all. The only thing close to being redeemable is his care for aquatic animal life, which is still uncomfortable because he has some really deep relationships with some of his aquatic life, pun intended. Anyways, like his relationship with Timothy the octopus. This relationship is brought to an incredibly bad end. Basically, Homelander forces the Deep to eat Timothy alive during a dinner with Ashley and his once upon a time wife, Cassandra. I believe it was Homelander trying to make Deep conform with the rest of humanity, which isn't really an excuse because Timothy was an innocent character, and as we know, octopi are incredibly smart. So to see Timothy killed off to show Homelander's cruelty and the Deep's cowardice was pretty horrific. The Deep slurping down his friend alive was made even worse when he said that Timothy was crying. It was all CGI, sure, and people love to eat octopus, but this is just awful.
Number 3, Made to Jump. Speaking of terrible deaths, while Stormfront's demise definitely sounds pretty bad, I think the woman who was there with Homelander when he heard about it, Chelsea, had it a lot worse. She was the one who was threatening to jump off a building when Homelander flew to her rescue. At first, his tactic was basically to convince her there was really no point of jumping because if Chelsea jumped, he'd just fly down and catch her before her body hit the pavement. Basically, it was all futile, he said, so she might as well just give it up. However, after learning of Stormfront's death, which by the way happens on Homelander's birthday, Homelander refuses to accept that Chelsea's life matters more than that of the woman he loved. And even when Chelsea begs to be let go and actually changes her mind, recanting on her initial conviction to jump, Homelander basically pushes her off the roof.
Alright, and at number 2, Homelander. Okay, so spoilers for The Boys comic book series, which finished in 2012. What was arguably the biggest twist of the comic came near the end of the story, in issue number 65 specifically. Luckily, this twist is not present in the show, so you don't need to worry about this, but it turns out that Black Noir is secretly a Homelander clone. He was created with the whole purpose of being meant to take Homelander down if he ever loses control. Problem is, Homelander enjoys being a puppet of Vought International, and that puts Homelander well in their good graces, so Homelander never ends up going rogue. This makes Black Noir incredibly frustrated, as he has been looking for the day when he'll finally fulfill his purpose of bringing down Homelander, only to never be given it for years and years and years. In the final issues of The Boys, after slowly watching Homelander get more and more insane, he finally snaps and attacks the White House, taking out the president. This finally opened up Black Noir to finally do what he was made to finally do, when he showed up to the White House in the climactic issue 65, revealing himself as a clone and then going for an absolute slogfest against the completely shocked Homelander. They ripped each other to shreds, but Black Noir came out on top before he stepped out onto the front lawn, missing significant chunks of his body. That is when the US military, alongside Billy Butcher, brought this insane soup to his brutal end with one final blow from Billy Butcher's crowbar and brain-crushing fist.
Number 1, Pulverized. I don't really know how else to describe what happened to Supersonic. He was the ex of Starlight. He was originally known by the name Drummer Boy, a member of the all-superhero band Super Sweet. He and Starlight once dated and were friends, as we saw during his time on American Hero. American Hero was basically a reality TV show that Vought used to recruit their newest member of the Seven after Stormfront was of course removed from the team. Alex, under the codename Supersonic, ended up winning and joined Starlight in a plot to basically try and take down Homelander. However, he made a mistake in trying to recruit A-Train to their side, who basically ratted out Alex and Annie to Homelander. As punishment, Homelander ended up killing Alex brutally, to the point that when he revealed Alex's corpse to Starlight, Alex was pretty much almost unrecognizable save for his suit. His limbs and body were basically torn asunder and his face was just pretty much gone. Number 10, Kingpin's Mutant Prison. Some of the worst fates really do come from Ruins, where it feels like everything is just awful for the sake of being awful, I guess. I mean, this series was made to sort of contrast the Marvels, and it does that admittedly, but it does that without really having anything else to say, it kind of feels like. When it comes to Quicksilver, he's seemingly still alive in this series, but honestly I can't imagine for much longer, which is how he's kind of making my list here. He ends up having his legs and arms removed because he's too fast, likely. However, Kingpin, his jailer here, claims that this is actually done for, and I quote, Quickie's own good. Considering that it looks like it wasn't done very well, and that it looks like Quicksilver may even still be bleeding, possibly bleeding out at this point, I can't imagine he'll last too much longer, and honestly, what a terrible way to go. Honestly, just existing in Ruins I feel like is a pretty terrible way to go, because if you exist in that world, you're probably already dead, or you're like on your way to dying. I mean, even the protagonist, the narrator we follow follow on this journey Phil Sheldon is. So yeah, and he's like the protagonist, so, or at least the narrator. I would say he's still the protagonist. He's still kind of the character we follow. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love when we talk about pretty bleak things, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. Number 9, Invisible Woman. Marvel Zombies really does have some of the most gruesome deaths, which is why I would never want to go there myself. This one at least was kind of going to a person that deserved it though, although I feel bad about saying that because I really do love this character, so like it's still sad that this happens in this reality. We are talking here about She-Hulk's death. I do love She-Hulk, although in this instance She-Hulk was already zombified and it kinda ate the kids of Susan Storm aka Invisible Woman and Reed Richards aka Mr. Fantastic in this universe, Valeria and Franklin. Weird thing is, you'd think Franklin would have been able to like fend her off with his reality warping powers, which I assumed he would also have in this universe, but hey, maybe on Earth 2149 Franklin didn't have powers, or you know, he was depowered prematurely. Either way, when Susan finds out that She-Hulk as a zombie has used her knowledge of the Baxter Building codes as someone who was once part of the Fantastic Four team to get in and then devour these two, she loses it and uses her power to create a force field and basically pop She-Hulk's head like a grape. It's insane to me how powerful Sue is. I mean, I guess at least it'd be quick, but yeah, Susan Storm's pretty wild. I would not want to be messed with by Susan Storm. Don't make her upset. Number 8, Driven Mad by Power. Another awful way to die, of course, coming to us from Runes, is the fate of Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer dies as a result of what they believe to be a sort of superhero madness. In essence, it's believed that Silver Surfer missed the feeling of breathing air for some reason, being unable to as he was, you know, traveling in the vacuum of space without, of course, needing to breathe. However, this was the very time when he decided, hey, you know what? I'd love to breathe right now, even though there's no air around me. Not a great time considering, yeah, there's no oxygen there, you're just floating around in the space between stars and planets. However, Silver Surfer is believed to have basically torn himself apart, clawing at himself until his lungs were exposed, and of course, despite having the power cosmic, he died. It's believed he died from the shock of the cold. I mean, honestly, what a way to go. Become so crazed that you think tearing yourself apart so you can breathe while flying alone in outer space on a silver surfboard is a good idea, or is simply something you must do. I can't imagine that. Also, I love how it's like, I gotta breathe, like time to rip myself apart. Okay then. Number 7, Squip Grub Chulp. What does that mean? You're about to find out. Symbiotes are definitely some of the most frightening creatures we have in the Marvel Universe. Definitely would not want to be rescued by one. Sorry, Venom. But also would never want to be dubbed a criminal by one. For years, Venom had been threatening to eat people's brains, and guess what? It also became more than a threat at one point. Venom threatened to do this because the symbiote actually feeds on the happy chemicals that brains produce. So either it needs a host with a good supply of that, or one that basically snacks on chocolate a lot, which is why Eddie usually does that. Otherwise, it would literally have to find some brains to eat because it needs those chemicals, baby. Now, I'm pretty sure Venom has moved past this requirement in the modern day of comics right now, but it doesn't stop it from being a deeply disturbing thing that the symbiote did/needed to do to survive at one point. Also, for anyone who was wondering, the name of this point is the sounds that Venom made when, you know, scarfing down some brains. So, ugh. Number 6, Microwaved. This one makes me very uncomfortable, but I'm gonna tell you about it anyways because that's my job, so that's what I gotta do right now. Even though, of course, it's in a Deadpool story, which I think is the only place you could get away with something like this at Marvel Comics. In the comic Deadpool Kills Deadpool, we head to the multiverse where Deadpool, a version of Deadpool anyways, is hunting down, well, other Deadpools. Like the title says, Deadpool kills Deadpool. That's what's happening here. Right at the beginning of the series in issue number 1, the sinister black-suited Deadpool ends up confronting his alternate zombified self, Headpool, who is of course also known as Deadpool though, but we're gonna call him Headpool for clarity's sake. Headpool hails from the Marvel zombie universe of Earth 2149, where the world was ravaged by zombies. This zombie though ended up making his way to Earth 616 before he was reduced to just being a head. So how does the evil Deadpool deal with him? Pretty easily and terribly by popping him in a microwave. Splat! Number 5, Devoured by Spiders. What a way to go. I just love spooky, scary Spider-Man stories. And this one comes from another tale based in the Spider-Man multiverse. We are talking about the fate of Spiders-Man. Spiders-Man is like Spider-Man, but this Peter Parker, instead of becoming a man with spider-like powers, basically became spiders. Peter Parker in this case fell into a vat of experimental spiders who devoured him completely. However, because science, they also ended up taking on his consciousness, which survived his physical death, with the spiders becoming kind of like a new version of that character, the hero Spiders-Man, who is entirely made up of spiders, and who also kind of goes on to become a villain, but that's a story for another time. Now, I personally am not too bothered by spiders in my everyday life, but I also feel like I've never dealt with, a whole vat of hungry spiders who wanted to eat me. So on paper, this one remains pretty terrifying to me, even though I'm usually pretty cool with spiders. Number 4. The Media Revenge. On our part 1, we talked about the tragic and disrespectful death of Janet Van Dyne in the Ultimate Universe, aka the Wasp, but at least we can say she was avenged. Or we could say that if this avenging wasn't so terrible. I don't know if we can quite say that because it's pretty terrible what happens here. When Hank Pym, aka Giant Man, aka Ant-Man, finds out that not only is Janet dead, but that the Blob also desecrated her corpse by, eating her, he decides to get revenge by doing the same to Blob, but while he is still alive, because Ultimate Universe. Hank grows to his giant size and then picks Blob up and basically bites off his head. Although at least I guess he doesn't eat him, he instead, spits Blob's head out, but still the whole scene is not saved from being insanely awful, I'd say, and this is still not a way that I personally would want to go. Honestly, facing a giant being just seems like a bad way to go in general. I don't like that idea. I don't like things that are gigantic. It makes me uncomfortable. If you're not eaten, you're still likely getting squashed, and that's just a yikes to me. I don't want someone to step on me. That's no thank you. Number 3. Sinking with your best pal. Possibly one of the worst ways I can imagine going just in general. Whether we're talking about comic books or real life, this way is pretty bad. Even just based on the circumstances here, the way that Captain Kate Pride went is just really sad too. She went down with a ship, drowned, which many have said is actually one of the most painful ways to go. And what made her death even worse was that she believed one of her best friends, her pal Lockheed, also perished with her. This happened when Sebastian Shaw attempted to remove Kate from the Hellfire Trading Company, which she sat on the board of as their Red Queen, by, drowning her, killing her. Number 2. Starvation and isolation. This one comes to us from Magneto, who saw this as a fair punishment to dole out to Red Skull, based on his treatment of other humans during World War II when he was obviously allied with Germany in the Third Reich. Magneto in essence took Red Skull to an isolated underground bunker, leaving him trapped there without any way out as the door was locked and located on the roof of the bunker. Red Skull was left with no ladder and only some water to basically keep him company, which he'd have to ration in order to prolong his survival, although obviously I don't think Magneto really intended him to survive. During his time trapped here, he began to hallucinate and started to lose his mind as starvation set in. I think this is possibly one of the worst ways to go in general, so once again, Magneto takes one of our top spots. Basically, don't upset Magneto. Just don't do that. Number 1. Carnage. I'd like to thank Fireball Earth for this terrifying and very true suggestion, so thank you from the comments. This is such a good point. Carnage is so frightening. Carnage is definitely one of the worst ways to go in the Marvel Universe. With Carnage, you not only have to deal with having your life ended by a symbiote, which honestly, like I said, is terrifying enough, but you also have to deal with Cletus Cassidy, who is the other part of Carnage. Carnage is one entity made up of 2, serial killer Cletus Cassidy and his soulmate, the alien symbiote offspring of Venom, who we often name Carnage, but technically Carnage is the entity of both of them together. Anyways, this symbiote is actually Venom's first child, who quickly became known as one of the most cruel and deadly out there, largely due to their connection to Cletus. I've seen what Carnage does when he has a whole town full of people to play with in Carnage USA, when the villain took control of an entire town, and it is definitely not pretty. Hands down, it's one of the most frightening Carnage stories I've ever read, so I would not want to be part of that at all. No thank you.
Number 10. Reverse Flash Brain Scramble. Reverse Flash is one of the most brutal villains in the DC universe, with his unhinged psychopathy, prompting him to end people's lives in incredibly disturbing ways, sometimes going back in time to prevent people from ever having even been born, and other times using his incredible speed to turn himself into a lethal weapon. In the Flash TV show, we've seen him vibrate his hand and use it to stop people's hearts, but in the classic comics, he used a similar but slightly different method on the Flash's wife. Over the course of their many battles, the hatred between Reverse Flash and the Flash grew exponentially. But while this was occurring, Reverse Flash was also falling in love with Barry's wife, Iris. He came into their home when Barry was away and proposed to Iris, who said no, because she loved her husband, and also because Reverse Flash is a crazy psycho. Reverse Flash got his revenge by sneaking into a costume party where everyone was dressed as superheroes, and he murdered Iris, who was dressed as Batgirl, by vibrating his hand so that it could pass through her skull and scramble her brain. There are certainly more painful ways to go, but the speed of this death is what makes it so bad. One moment you're at a party with your whole life ahead of you, and the next your brain has been torn apart at super speed and you're just gone. Number 9. Jason Todd's death. Jason Todd has had a pretty rough life. He was an orphan living on the streets before one fateful day he attempted to steal the tires off of the Batmobile in Crime Alley. Batman caught him in the act and decided that the best way to help the boy handle his rage was to give him an outlet, training him to be the second Robin after Dick Grayson left to become Nightwing. Things were looking up. Jason eventually discovered that his birth mother was still alive and set out to find her. He eventually found Dr. Sheila Haywood working in a refugee camp in Iran, but discovered that she was being blackmailed by the Joker into letting him steal important supplies. He offered to help his mother, revealing that he was the Boy Wonder, and she led him to a warehouse. Once there, Jason realized that his mother had led him into a trap as she was embezzling hospital funds and felt that if Robin was allowed to live, her operation would be at risk. She turned him over to the Joker, who beat him nearly to death with a crowbar and then left him in the building, which was rigged to explode. So, Jason found his real mother, was almost immediately betrayed by her, beaten up by a homicidal clown, and then blown up. He eventually returned from the dead, but that doesn't change the fact that this was a rough way to go. Number 8. Gentleman Ghost's Unending Torment. Jim Craddock was a highwayman in the 1800s who came to America from England and began being known as Gentleman Jim. He crossed paths with the famous gunslingers Nighthawk and Cinnamon, and although Jim was a criminal, Nighthawk mistakenly believed that he had committed a crime against his wife. As a result, Nighthawk executed Jim in cold blood. Jim came back as a ghost, doomed to wander the earth until he could get his revenge and end the lives of his executioners. Unfortunately for the Gentleman Ghost, his executioners are one of the many reincarnations of Hawkman and Hawkgirl, who are always reborn anew whenever they die. Therefore, there is no way for Gentleman Ghost to fulfill his curse, and he is doomed to never enter the afterlife, having been a ghost for hundreds of years. Now, getting executed for a crime you didn't do is bad enough. Becoming a ghost who can't move on to the next life until he has revenge is worse. But finding out that the people you have to get revenge against are unable to stay dead, therefore making your entire curse unfulfillable, is a whole other level of awful. Number 7. Infected by the Carrier. Appearing in the Batman Journey into Night miniseries from 2005, the Carrier is a villain who was infected with a deadly disease while searching for treasure in a cave. He survived, but as a result, he became deadly to anyone who so much as breathed the same air as him. Anyone who came into contact with him would begin going through painful contractions as they struggled to breathe and began forming large infected pustules and foaming green gunk out of their mouths. Carrier eventually discovered that he could prevent this by wearing a gas mask with reversed filters and set upon a quest for revenge against the man who sold him the bogus treasure map. Huge amounts of people died as a result of Carrier coming to Gotham, and the speed at which they were infected, symptomatic, and finally dead was a horrifying way for anyone unfortunate to cross paths with the Carrier to go. Number 6. Death by Rorschach. The characters featured in Alan Moore's Watchmen are extremely brutal with their enemies, with one of the most aggressive of the vigilantes being Walter Kovacs, aka Rorschach. Rorschach is known for ending the lives of his enemies in increasingly brutal ways. In the book, we are told one enemy got dropped down an elevator shaft. In a flashback, we see him handcuff a man in a burning house, giving him a hacksaw so he would spend his last moments trying to remove his own hand. And in issue 8, Rorschach electrocutes a man and drowns another with a toilet. I think the most painful method that we see the character use in the story is in issue number 6, when he is in prison. One of the other prisoners approaches him in the cafeteria line, tries to use a shiv against the imprisoned vigilante. Rorschach responds by grabbing a tray of boiling oil and throwing it in the prisoner's face. The man is horrifically burned as Rorschach is dragged away, reminding the various prisoners that he isn't locked up with them, they're locked up with him. The burned man spends days in the prison hospital in excruciating pain before he finally passes away from his injuries. Number 5. Abattoir's family drama. Abattoir was a Gotham villain who believed that by ending the lives of his family members, he could absorb their life forces and become immortal. He went about destroying his family tree, but was frequently thwarted by Batman. During the Nightfall arc, where Bruce Wayne was out of commission due to a broken spine, and Jean-Paul Valley was the new Batman, Abattoir went after the last living member of his family, Graham Etchison. He put Graham in an elaborate death trap designed to cause Graham as much pain as possible before his death. He put Graham on a bed of nails with a special rig set up that would drop a weight on him every hour or so. With every new weight, Graham would sink deeper into the nails until he would eventually die after several hours. The new Batman went after Abattoir, but was more concerned with punishing evil than he was with protecting innocent lives, and let the villain fall into a vat of molten steel. As a result, Abattoir was unable to lead Jean-Paul to Graham, and he died a slow and painful death. Number 4. Mr. Hyde plays Hyde the Jekyll with the Invisible Man. Another Alan Moore series known for its dark themes and extreme violence is The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. In it, characters from classic literature come together to form a team. One of the members of the team is Holly Griffin, otherwise known as the Invisible Man. He is a twisted monster of a man who uses his abilities to have his way with unsuspecting women, and in volume 2 of the series, he takes his lack of morality to new levels. When Martians invade the Earth, he realizes that there is no way for humanity to win the War of the Worlds, and decides to save his own skin by making a deal with the invaders to betray humanity in exchange for being allowed to rule the planet alongside them. He also attacks his teammate Mina Murray, thus earning the ire of another of his teammates, Edward Hyde. In the League universe, Edward Hyde is kind of similar to the Hulk, being incredibly strong and about 3 times his usual size. So, in issue 5 of volume 2, he decided to use his size to his advantage, beating and pinning down the Invisible Man. He then spent hours brutally, well, you know, over and over until the Invisible Man died. His remains becoming visible only once he had fully expired after hours of pain and humiliation at Hyde's hands. Number 3. Batman Who Laughs Super Brutal Murder. When the Joker of Earth-22 found out that he was dying, he decided to go on one last spree in an attempt to send Batman over the edge. He took out all of the other supervillains in Gotham, as well as Jim Gordon. He blew up several buildings and captured Batman. He forced the Dark Knight to watch as he ended the lives of the parents of kidnapped children in front of them before infecting them with the Joker toxin. In order to stop the madness, Batman broke free and broke the Clown Prince's neck. When he did this, Batman was inadvertently exposed to a Joker toxin, which corrupted his mind and gave him the Joker's sick and twisted sense of humor and murderous desires. This Batman went on to kill the Bat family, as well as the entire Justice League, before using his evil cunning to take over and destroy his world. His methods of taking out his former teammates were all awful, but the most despicable of them has to be how he took out Superman and his family. He brought Superman, his son John, and Lois Lane together, and then exposed Clark and John to black kryptonite. This particular strain of kryptonite drives Kryptonians insane, and as a result, Clark and John ripped Lois apart before attacking each other, as the Batman Who Laughs watched their cruel and messy demise. Number 2. Anything involving the Spectre. The spirit of vengeance in the DC universe first appeared in More Fun Comics number 52. He was originally a demon named Aztar, who was helping Lucifer try and take control of heaven. He eventually had a change of heart and surrendered to the Archangel Michael. As a means of atonement, his memory and consciousness were wiped, and he was transformed into the Spectre. He is divinely powered, being capable of almost anything he can imagine, can travel between dimensions, organs, and can shoot energy blasts. He's immortal and capable of flight, intangibility, possession, telepathy, and telekinesis, just to name a few of his powers. In order to temper this power, he must be bonded to a human host, with this most often being Jim Corrigan. Spectre has no limit to his power, but is bound by the morality of his host, who often prevents him from unleashing the full wrath of God upon his enemies. He is known for subjecting his victims to fates worse than death, before eventually subjecting them to death as well. Over his years in the comics, he has used some strange and disturbing methods to dispatch his enemies, such as aging them to death, melting them, cutting them in half with a giant pair of scissors, turning a man into a sentient and feeling mannequin who is then dumped in a fire and painfully burnt, turning a bunch of junkies into his fingertips and then injecting them with liquid fire, or in one extreme case, burning down an entire country. Number 1. The Omega Sanction. The villain Darkseid is perhaps the most evil being in the DC universe, being a frequent foe of the Justice League. Sure, he might destroy you with his incredible strength, or even with the use of his Omega beams, which are essentially deadly energy beams that always find their target, usually reducing the victim to ash. That's bad, but it could be worse. If Darkseid instead used the Omega Sanction. The Omega Sanction traps you in an endless series of lives, each one more painful and awful than the last. So, you don't just die a horrible death, you die horrible death after horrible death without respite forever. It doesn't get much worse than that. Number 10. Trying to save the day and blowing your head off. Not all superhero teams are created equal. A prime example of this is Section 8, who are possibly the worst team on the DC roster. They have members such as Six Pack, who's just an alcoholic who attacks people with a broken beer bottle, Dog Welder, who welds the bodies of dead dogs to his enemies' faces, and perhaps most useless of all, Friendly Fire. Friendly Fire has the ability to shoot powerful energy blasts out of his hands that deal devastating damage. Unfortunately, as his name suggests, he is totally incapable of hitting what he's aiming at, and instead always ends up hitting his teammates. This has led to the deaths of a couple Section 8 members, but the worst death has got to be the one that occurred when the team went up against the mini-angled ones. These strange visitors attacked the team, easily dispatching team members like Jean de Baton and Dog Welder. Friendly Fire realized it was up to him, and he had to come through for his friends. As he put it, "I gotta do it. Just this once. Gotta hit what I'm aiming at. I can't let my buddies down. Must hold the power." He unleashed the full force of his blast and blew his own head off, barely being able to utter the word crap before dying. This is a bad death, but it also may be one of the most embarrassing ones you could possibly have. Number 9. Death by Psychic Squid. In Alan Moore's Watchmen, Earth is on the verge of atomic war with the doomsday clock ticking ever closer to the end of the world. In an effort to try and bring the world together with a common enemy, the smartest man on the planet, Ozymandias, puts a plan in motion to ensure a ceasefire between the States and the Soviets. He has a massive psychic squid engineered, and then he teleports it into the middle of New York City. It gives off a psychic pulse that causes the horrible deaths of half of the city. In the beginning of issue 12, we see the result of this, and the streets are littered with terrified looking bodies of people whose last moments were filled with nothing but pain and horror, having been declared acceptable losses in Ozymandias' unilaterally enacted plan to try and save the Earth. It's not the kind of end that anyone wants for themselves, and the cynical calculation of their lives being worth losing makes it even worse. In follow-up stories set in the Watchmen universe, which really shouldn't have been made, but whatever, we learn that this false flag alien attack was discovered by the general populace not long after, making all these deaths utterly meaningless. Number 8. Gorilla Grodd. Gorilla Grodd is a Flash villain who, as his name would suggest, is a gorilla. He is the king of a race of super intelligent gorillas who live in Gorilla City, and of course he hates humanity. He is a formidable foe, having telepathic powers that make him extremely dangerous. Beyond that, he's also a 600-pound gorilla. He is an extremely brutal character, and I don't really have much to say about him, other than the fact that I think getting beaten to death by an angry 600-pound gorilla would be a really terrible way to die. Enough said. Number 7. Getting drained by Parasite. Rudy Jones was a relatively normal man until he one everyone a tour of a LexCorp facility. While there, he dropped a donut on the floor and decided to eat it anyway, citing the 5-second rule. Unfortunately, the donut had landed in a bit of toxic waste and it affected Rudy, transforming him into a pink monster called the Parasite. The Parasite is always hungry and will do anything to try and satiate his hunger. When he goes up against Superman, he drains the Man of Steel's powers and grows stronger, but Superman isn't the only person he will go after. When the Parasite feeds on a normal civilian like you or me, he grabs them and drains their life force. This causes his victim to shrivel up and die, leaving nothing behind but a withered corpse. Now, coming across any supervillain would be a horrible experience, but being grabbed by a monster who painfully drains away the remaining life in your body as you watch yourself shrivel up until you finally die is not how I want to go. I want to die in a tragic hammock accident. Number 6. Joker venom. If you were to live in Gotham City, the last person you would want to cross paths with is the Ace of Knaves, the Clown Prince of Crime, the Harlequin of Hate, the Joker. Joker is a total psycho who has absolutely no reverence for human life, often claiming his victims' lives in terrible and painful ways. He's had some brutal kills that were relatively one-off in method, like skinning a man alive in one book, but he typically saves these kinds of deaths for henchmen that have crossed him. If you are a normal civilian coming across Joker, your most likely cause of death will be either getting shot or being poisoned with Joker venom. Joker venom is a special chemical that Joker developed which causes the victim to go into uncontrollable spasms of laughter, which will cause asphyxiation. While this is happening, you would experience vivid hallucinations and madness as the muscles in your face contract into a horrible rictus grin, giving you a resemblance to the man who ended your life. Number 5. Getting eaten. There are a lot of horrible ways to die while living in the DC universe. It seems like no matter where you go, whether it be Gotham, Metropolis, or Keystone City, every other day there is some kind of supervillain attack that is going to result in a massive loss of life until the local superhero manages to stop it. One of the surprisingly common things you would have to worry about as a civilian in the DC universe is how many of these supervillains want to eat you. Off the top of my head, there is Yurd the Unknown, who is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse but also a giant crocodile. He posed as a hero for a time to join the Black Marvel family before betraying the team and eating Black Adam's sidekick. That's right, that annoying kid who is following the Rock around in the Black Adam movie? Yeah, in the comics he gets eaten by a giant crocodile. And then there's King Shark, who is of course a massive humanoid shark who will often eat his prey. Then there's Killer Croc, who is a human who has a skin condition that makes him look like a crocodile, who is also known for eating people. Now, getting eaten by a monster would suck, but if you were eaten by a giant monster who was like a leviathan, then it would be over in like one bite. But these guys, although so large that you couldn't hope to fight back, aren't quite large enough to end your suffering in one chomp, and it would likely take a few very painful and very sharp bites before you bit the dust. Number 4. Turning into a Dollatron. Another Gotham rogue you wouldn't want to come across is Laszlo Valentine, otherwise known as Professor Pig. Pig is trying to achieve human perfection by kidnapping people and turning them into mindless and identical minions who he calls Dollatrons. The method of this is by burning a mask onto your face, which you could never remove, and then using surgical tools to put you through so much unimaginable pain that the trauma causes you to forget your identity and be simply a mindless doll who does Professor Pig's bidding. You may be thinking, oh, Andrew, they're not dead. Why are they on this list? Well, they have no trace of their prior identities remaining, and they have no thoughts or feelings of their own. For all intents and purposes, they're dead. And plus, it is not uncommon for Pig to send his Dollatrons to their deaths for the cause. So if you want to be really specific, this entry could be getting turned into a Dollatron who then blows themselves up. Number 3. Getting injected by the Scarecrow. Dr. Jonathan Crane is a Batman villain who has managed to come up with a chemical that causes those who ingest it to experience their greatest fears. When given the toxin in a gaseous form, the victim will have a really bad trip, seeing hallucinations that correspond with their fears. So if the person is scared of snakes, they will see that. However, Scarecrow also has a strain of his toxin which is much more powerful that he doesn't typically use. When the toxin is injected into the victim, they will experience the same unfathomable level of terror, slowly losing their minds until their heart eventually gives out, causing them to scare themselves to death. This is a rough way to go, because you are dealing with the horror of being at the mercy of the scarecrow, as well as the fear of death, and having to deal with your deepest, darkest fear at the same time. Ah, commitment! Number 2, getting captured by the Black Mask. When thinking about DC villains you wouldn't want to be stuck with, you might think the answer is Joker or Darkseid, but they, although cruel, usually dispatch their victims pretty quickly, all things considered. No, the villain you really have to hope you don't end up at the mercy of is Roman Sionis, aka the Black Mask. He is not above taking someone out with a simple headshot, but God help you if you come across him on a day where he has some time to kill. He is an expert at advanced interrogation techniques, being able to get even the most strong-willed person to talk after subjecting them to extreme pain, such as when he captured Spoiler near the end of the Batman War Games arc. Even if you don't have information he needs, you might end up in a sticky situation with the Mask, as he has a room designed exclusively for his horrible hobby where he practices on random people just for fun. So that would be a pretty bad way to die. Number 1. Prey of the Hunters 3. In Animal Man Volume 2, Animal Man is dealing with his daughter Maxine's new powers and her connection to the Red, force that connects all animal life in the universe. Animal Man has a strange map show up on his body, which will lead them to the Red, and he and his daughter set out to find it. Going after them are the villainous Hunters 3, who are essentially eldritch creatures from another dimension. They hide in plain sight by feeding on people that they come across. They slurp out your insides, leaving nothing but your skin, which they then get inside and walk around in. The disguise doesn't last very long before they look absolutely terrifying, with tentacles and pincers popping out of your now deformed skin. It's a rough way to go, and the knowledge that you are now a host to an evil creature who is desecrating your corpse makes it my pick for the worst way to die in the DC universe.